The biting wind whipped at Vivian's threadbare shawl, a flimsy shield against the icy indifference of the city. Her stomach gnawed with a hunger that echoed the emptiness in her heart. The opulent hotel loomed before her, a fortress of warmth and excess against the gray, unforgiving sky. Its gilded doors promised a world she'd once known, a world now lost, stolen, replaced by this gnawing desperation. She swallowed, the lump in her throat a mixture of pride and shame. "Please, can you give me some food? My grandma is starving to death." The words rasped, barely audible against the city's din. Each syllable was a tiny shard of her dignity, chipping away with each breath. She saw her reflection in the polished brass of the door handle, a ghost of the girl she once was, her eyes now hollow, her cheeks gaunt. Was this really her? Reduced to begging on the streets? A flicker of defiance ignited within her, a tiny ember against the crushing weight of her circumstances. She wouldn't break. Not yet. A woman, draped in furs and dripping with diamonds, emerged from the revolving doors, the scent of expensive perfume clinging to her like a second skin. Vivian held her breath, hoping, praying for a sliver of compassion. The woman's gaze, sharp and dismissive, swept over her. Disgust curled her lip. Where did this little beggar come from? Smelly. Get lost. The words, laced with venom, stung more than any physical blow. Vivian recoiled, the shame a burning brand on her skin. The woman's perfume, moments before a tantalizing promise of warmth, now choked her, a suffocating reminder of the chasm that separated them. Her grandmother's frail face flashed before her eyes, her whispered pleas for food echoing in her ears. No. She wouldn't give up. Not for herself, but for the woman who had given her everything. Inside the lavish hotel suite, Eve Gwen admired her reflection in the ornate mirror. The diamonds on her fingers glittered under the crystal chandelier, a testament to her power, her triumph. That pathetic beggar. How dare she taint the air with her presence? A wave of irritation washed over her, followed by a smug satisfaction. Let the little wretch starve. It served her right. She thought of Vivian, the true heiress, the one who should have been standing in her place, enjoying this luxury, this power. A flicker of unease pricked at her. No. She wouldn't let that happen. She'd crushed Vivian once, and she'd do it again. Xavier, her vapid boyfriend, emerged from the bathroom, his face smooth and unburdened by thought. He draped an arm around her, oblivious to the storm raging within her. "Ready to go, darling?" he murmured, his voice a syrupy drawl. Eve forced a smile, her thoughts a whirlwind of calculations and schemes. The opulent lobby of the Nens Group headquarters hummed with hushed efficiency. Louis Leo strode through the polished marble halls, his presence commanding attention. He exuded an aura of power, of control, a carefully constructed facade that hid the turmoil beneath. His mind raced, sifting through the complexities of the Chase acquisition, the legal intricacies, the potential pitfalls. He hadn't anticipated the tenacity of the Chase family, their refusal to simply roll over and surrender their legacy. He paused, his gaze fixed on a distant point, lost in thought. The image of Vivian, her face pale and drawn, flashed before his eyes. He'd seen her, just a glimpse, amongst the throngs of people outside the hotel. The recognition had been instinctive, visceral. He'd pushed the image aside, dismissed it as a trick of the light, a phantom conjured by his guilt. He clenched his jaw, the guilt a persistent ache. He'd made a deal with the devil to protect her, to ensure her safety. But at what cost? The sterile white walls of the hospital room seemed to amplify the silence. Vivian sat beside her grandmother's bed, her hand clasped around the frail, papery skin. The rhythmic beeping of the heart monitor was a constant reminder of the precariousness of life, of the thin thread that held her grandmother tethered to this world. The doctor's words echoed in her mind: malnutrition, exhaustion, she needs proper care. A wave of despair washed over her. Where would she find the money? How could she save her? She looked at her grandmother's face, etched with years of hardship, and a fierce determination hardened her resolve. She wouldn't let her die. Not like this. A commotion erupted outside the room, the sound of raised voices and hurried footsteps. The door burst open, and Louis stood there, his face a mask of controlled emotion. Behind him, Eve Gwen stood, her face contorted in a mixture of shock and fury. The air crackled with tension, the silence shattered. What is the meaning of this? Eve's voice, sharp and accusatory, sliced through the tense silence. She glared at Vivian, her eyes blazing with a mixture of disbelief and rage. You little beggar. What are you doing here? Vivian met her gaze, a flicker of defiance in her eyes. She knew the truth. She knew who she was. And she would no longer hide. I'm Vivian Chase, she stated, her voice clear and strong, each word a small victory against the years of fear and uncertainty. And this is my grandmother. Louis stepped forward, his presence filling the room. He looked at Vivian, a complex mix of emotions swirling in his eyes. Relief, guilt, and something else, something akin to admiration. He turned to Eve, his voice cold and sharp. Enough, Eve. It's time the truth came out. He revealed the carefully constructed web of lies, the manipulations, the betrayals. The room fell silent, the weight of his words settling like a shroud. Eve's face paled, her carefully constructed facade crumbling. Xavier stared, his mouth agape, finally grasping the depth of the deception. In the stunned silence that followed, Louis turned to Vivian, his gaze softening. He reached out, his hand gently cupping her cheek. The touch, unexpected and tender, sent a shiver down her spine. You're safe now, Vivian, he murmured, his voice low and husky. I promise. The words, simple yet profound, hung in the air, a promise of protection, of belonging, of a future she had never dared to imagine. Vivian looked at him, her heart pounding in her chest, a strange mix of hope and trepidation blooming within her. The battle was far from over, but for the first time in a long time, she felt a glimmer of hope, a sense that perhaps, just perhaps, she wasn't alone. The touch of his hand on her cheek was a silent vow, a tangible connection in a world that had felt cold and distant for far too long. The opulent suite shimmered, sunlight catching the crystal chandeliers and scattering rainbows across the Persian rug. Vivian, still clutching the borrowed shawl, felt a tremor run through her. This wasn't her world. This belonged to people like Eve Gwen, people who wore diamonds like morning dew and spoke of million-dollar deals as casually as the weather. Just a few hours ago, she had been a shadow, a ghost scavenging for scraps. Now, here she was, amidst this extravagant display of wealth, a lie clinging to her like the scent of expensive perfume. You're sure you're all right? Eve's voice, laced with a condescending sweetness, pulled Vivian from her reverie. You've been awfully quiet. Vivian forced a smile, a brittle, fragile thing. Inside, a storm raged. This charade couldn't last. The truth, heavy and suffocating, pressed against her chest, demanding release. Just overwhelmed by your kindness, she murmured, the words tasting like ash in her mouth. Eve waved a dismissive hand, her diamond-encrusted fingers flashing. Nonsense, dear. It's the least I could do. Anyone would have helped someone in your situation. The unspoken words hung in the air, thick with judgment. Vivian's jaw tightened. She could feel the familiar sting of humiliation, the burning shame that had been her constant companion for the past few months. But something else was stirring too, something harder, colder. A flicker of defiance ignited in her eyes. Wait, she said, her voice surprisingly steady. Eve paused, a curious expression flitting across her face. Vivian took a deep breath, the opulent air filling her lungs. This was it. The moment of truth. No more hiding. No more pretending. I'll pay you back. The words hung in the air, charged with an unspoken promise. Eve's perfectly sculpted eyebrows arched. A flicker of amusement danced in her eyes. Pay me back. Darling, with what? The question dripped with sarcasm, a subtle reminder of Vivian's perceived destitution. Vivian met her gaze, her own eyes hardening. Everything, she said, the single word echoing in the vast room. Everything you've given me, and more. Eve's amusement faded, replaced by a flicker of unease. She leaned forward, her expression sharpening. What are you playing at? Vivian straightened, the borrowed shawl slipping from her shoulders. She didn't bother to retrieve it. It was time to shed the disguise, to reveal the woman beneath the rags. My name is Vivian Chase, she said, her voice ringing with a newfound authority. Remember it. The silence that followed was thick enough to cut with a knife. Eve's face, carefully composed just moments ago, fractured. Disbelief, confusion, and a dawning fear warred in her eyes. The name, Vivian Chase, hung in the air like a thunderclap. The heiress. The missing granddaughter. The one everyone believed to be dead. Vivian watched the emotions flicker across Eve's face, a grim satisfaction settling in her heart. The power dynamic had shifted, the ground beneath their feet realigning. Eve's carefully constructed world, her carefully curated image, was crumbling. Vivian's internal monologue was a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. Triumph mingled with apprehension, a cold fury intertwined with a strange sense of vulnerability. She had revealed her hand, but the game was far from over. What would Eve do? What would anyone do, faced with the sudden resurrection of someone they thought long gone? The tension in the room was palpable, a taut wire stretched to its breaking point. The delicate floral scent of the room seemed to suffocate her, the opulence a mocking reminder of everything she had lost. She had stepped back into her world, but it was a world she no longer recognized, a world filled with shadows and whispers, with enemies lurking in every corner. The news spread like wildfire. Whispers in gilded hallways, hushed conversations in hospital corridors. Vivian Chase was alive. The whispers reached Louis Leo, CEO of the Nens Group, a man whose life was meticulously planned, whose control was absolute. He found Vivian in a sterile hospital room, the stark white walls a stark contrast to the opulent suite where he had last seen her, or so he thought. His eyes, dark and unreadable, scanned her face, searching for answers to questions he hadn't yet formulated. The beggar, the woman he had instinctively protected, was Vivian Chase, his wife, the woman he thought he had lost. A complex array of emotions flickered across his face: disbelief, anger, a flicker of something akin to relief. His carefully constructed world, the one built on the foundation of her supposed death, was tilting on its axis. The room was filled with the hushed beeps of medical equipment, the rhythmic pulse a stark reminder of the fragility of life. The antiseptic smell stung his nostrils, a sharp contrast to the lingering scent of her perfume, the one he remembered from their brief, tumultuous marriage. He had mourned her, cursed fate, and built an empire on the ashes of their love. Now, she was here, alive, a ghost returned to haunt him. Vivian, he said, the name a low rumble in his chest. The single word held a lifetime of unspoken emotions. Vivian looked at him, her eyes guarded, a flicker of defiance in their depths. The intervening months had etched lines of hardship on her face, but hadn't diminished her spirit. She was a survivor, a fighter. He saw it in the set of her jaw, the way she held herself, even in this vulnerable state. Louis, she acknowledged, her voice devoid of warmth. The air crackled between them, thick with unspoken accusations, with the weight of their shared history. The police hovered in the background, their presence a stark reminder of the tangled web of deceit and betrayal that had brought them to this point. Eve Gwen, her face pale and drawn, stood by Xavier's side, her eyes darting between Louis and Vivian, calculating, scheming. The Chase family, the patriarch and the frail grandmother, hovered anxiously, their relief at finding Vivian overshadowed by the shocking revelations of the past few hours. The Leo family, a collection of ambitious relatives and calculating business partners, watched from the periphery, their expressions a mixture of curiosity and apprehension. This was a turning point, a moment where the carefully constructed facades began to crumble, revealing the raw, messy truth beneath. The room was a stage, and they were all players in a drama whose ending was yet to be written. Louis stepped closer, his gaze unwavering. He reached out, his hand hovering hesitantly over hers. A silent question hung in the air. Forgiveness? Explanation? A plea for understanding? Vivian flinched, but didn't pull away. The touch, when it came, was surprisingly gentle. A flicker of surprise crossed her face, quickly masked by a guarded expression. Louis's touch, a silent declaration of possession, a subtle warning to those watching, sent ripples through the room. It was a gesture that spoke volumes, a gesture that redefined their relationship, a gesture that signaled the beginning of a new chapter, a chapter fraught with uncertainty, danger, and the lingering embers of a love thought lost. The opulent lobby of the Grand Hyatt shimmered, a cacophony of hushed conversations and the gentle clinking of fine china. Sunlight streamed through the panoramic windows, painting the polished marble floors with shifting patterns of light and shadow. Vivian sat perched on the edge of a plush velvet armchair, a stark contrast to the tattered clothes she'd worn just days ago. She traced the rim of her porcelain teacup, the warmth seeping into her fingers, a stark contrast to the icy dread that coiled in her stomach. Eve Gwen, resplendent in a designer suit that screamed money and power, sat opposite her, her eyes narrowed, scrutinizing Vivian with a mixture of curiosity and disdain. Vivian could almost feel the weight of Eve's gaze, like a physical pressure, dissecting her, analyzing her transformation. Just yesterday, she had been a beggar, scraping for pennies. Now, here she was, sipping Earl Grey in a five-star hotel. How could she explain the inexplicable? The sudden, dizzying shift in her reality felt like a dream, a precarious perch above a chasm of secrets. So, Eve began, her voice laced with a condescending sweetness that grated on Vivian's nerves. You went home to get your piggy bank just to give it to him. He's so pitiful. Her words dripped with mock sympathy, but Vivian sensed the underlying venom. It was a thinly veiled taunt, a reminder of Vivian's former destitution. Vivian's hand tightened around the teacup. Pitiful. The word echoed in her mind, a cruel mockery of the complex emotions swirling within her. Louis was anything but pitiful. He was a force, an enigma. And he was her husband. A truth that still felt alien, unbelievable. It's complicated, Vivian finally managed, her voice barely above a whisper. She looked down at the swirling tea leaves, searching for an escape route in their random patterns. Every syllable felt like a betrayal, a lie compounding the web of deceit she was caught in. How could she explain the intricate dance of power and vulnerability that bound her to Louis? How could she reveal the truth without shattering the fragile illusion of normalcy she was desperately trying to maintain? Eve let out a short, sharp laugh, the sound echoing in the cavernous lobby. Complicated? How so? Did your fairy godmother suddenly appear and grant you a shopping spree at Harrods? She gestured towards Vivian's clothes, a subtle but pointed reminder of her newly acquired wealth. Vivian felt a flush of heat creep up her neck. Every thread of her expensive dress felt like a brand, marking her as an imposter. She wanted to scream, to tear off the mask and reveal the truth, but fear held her captive. The fear of Eve's reaction, the fear of the repercussions, the fear of what Louis would do. I came into some money, Vivian stammered, the words tasting like ash in her mouth. She knew it sounded weak, unconvincing. But what else could she say? The truth, the insane, unbelievable truth, was too dangerous to utter. Eve's eyes narrowed further, a glint of suspicion in their depths. Oh really? And what miraculous windfall was this? Her voice dripped with skepticism. Vivian could practically hear the gears turning in Eve's mind, calculating, analyzing, searching for the flaw in her story. Vivian's heart hammered against her ribs. She could feel the walls closing in, the web of lies tightening around her. "It's a family matter," she replied, her voice barely audible. Her gaze darted around the lobby, searching for an escape, a distraction, anything to break the suffocating tension. The opulent surroundings, once a symbol of luxury, now felt like a gilded cage. "Family matter?" Eve echoed, her voice laced with amusement. "How intriguing. I wasn't aware you had family with such resources." The unspoken accusation hung in the air, thick and heavy. Vivian's mind raced, desperately searching for a plausible explanation. The sudden ringing of Eve's phone was a jarring interruption. She glanced at the screen, her expression hardening. "Excuse me," she muttered, rising to her feet. "I have to take this." She walked away, her heels clicking against the marble floor, leaving Vivian alone in the suffocating silence of the lobby. As Eve's figure disappeared into the elevator, Vivian released a shaky breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. The reprieve was short-lived. A wave of nausea washed over her, the weight of her deception pressing down on her like a physical burden. Later that day, the sterile white walls of the hospital room seemed to amplify the hushed whispers and the rhythmic beeping of machines. Vivian sat beside Louis's bed, her hand resting lightly on his. He was still unconscious, his face pale and drawn, a stark contrast to the vibrant, commanding presence she knew. The events of the past few days had unfolded with the dizzying speed of a nightmare. The confrontation with Eve, the revelation of her true identity, the sudden illness that had felled Louis, it was all too much. The door creaked open, and a doctor entered, his face etched with concern. He spoke in low tones, explaining the complexities of Louis's condition, the uncertainty of his recovery. Vivian listened, her heart sinking with each word. Fear, cold and sharp, pierced through the numbness that had enveloped her. She couldn't lose him. Not now. Not after everything. As the doctor left, Vivian leaned closer to Louis, her voice a choked whisper. "Please come back to me." She closed her eyes, willing him to wake up, willing him to fight. A tear escaped, tracing a path down her cheek. Suddenly, a hand, weak but firm, grasped hers. Vivian's eyes flew open. Louis was awake, his gaze fixed on her, a flicker of recognition in his eyes. "Eve," he murmured, his voice raspy. The name, spoken in his weakened state, was like a punch to the gut. Vivian's breath hitched. "He thinks I'm Eve." The realization sent a fresh wave of pain washing over her. She was a stand-in, a substitute, a ghost inhabiting someone else's life. "It's Vivian," she corrected softly, her voice trembling. A flicker of confusion crossed Louis's face, a brief furrow of his brow. Then, his gaze softened, a hint of a smile playing on his lips. "Vivian," he repeated, the name sounding different now, imbued with a warmth that sent a shiver down her spine. He squeezed her hand gently. "Don't leave me." His voice was weak, but the words carried a weight, a depth of emotion that resonated deep within Vivian's soul. It wasn't the declaration of love she craved, but it was something. A connection, a thread of hope in the tangled web of their lives. In that moment, surrounded by the sterile silence of the hospital room, Vivian felt a glimmer of warmth, a spark of something akin to hope. Maybe, just maybe, they could find a way through this, a way to build something real amidst the ruins of their complicated, tangled past. The sterile scent of antiseptic hung heavy in the air, a stark contrast to the opulent perfume that still clung faintly to Vivian's clothes, a lingering reminder of the hotel suite, of the life she'd briefly glimpsed. Sunlight streamed through the window, painting stripes across the pristine white sheets. Vivian watched the dust motes dance in the beams, a strange sense of detachment washing over her. Her body ached, a dull throb radiating from the gash on her arm, a physical manifestation of the emotional turmoil within. Just a day ago, she was a ghost, a shadow flitting through the city's underbelly. Now, she was Vivian Chase, heiress, wife, a pawn in a game she was only beginning to understand. A soft click at the door broke the silence. Vivian's breath hitched, her hand instinctively going to the bandage on her arm. A woman entered, her steps hesitant, her eyes wide with a mixture of apprehension and longing. Vivian's heart pounded against her ribs. This woman, there was a familiarity in her features, a resonance in her gaze that stirred something deep within Vivian's soul, a forgotten melody. It was in the curve of her jaw, the way her fingers nervously twisted the strap of her handbag. Could it be Vivian? The woman's voice was a trembling whisper, laced with years of unspoken words. Vivian's throat constricted. She wanted to speak, to ask, to confirm the wild hope that was blossoming in her chest, but fear held her captive. Fear of disappointment, of shattering the fragile illusion. They told me it was you. The woman took a tentative step closer, her eyes searching Vivian's face. My daughter. The words hung in the air, heavy with the weight of years of separation, of lost moments and stolen dreams. Vivian's carefully constructed walls began to crumble, brick by agonizing brick. A tear traced a path down her cheek, followed by another, and another, until a torrent of emotion poured forth, years of suppressed grief and loneliness finding release. This was her mother. The woman she had yearned for, the phantom presence in her fragmented memories. Mother? The word escaped her lips, a broken sob. It was a question, a plea, a desperate yearning for confirmation. The woman rushed to her side, engulfing her in a hug that was both tentative and fierce. Vivian clung to her, burying her face in her shoulder, the scent of her perfume, a faint floral aroma, evoking a flood of fragmented memories, a warm embrace, a lullaby, a garden bathed in sunlight. Oh, Vivian, my sweet girl. Her mother's voice was thick with emotion. I thought I'd lost you forever. She pulled back slightly, cupping Vivian's face in her hands, her thumbs gently wiping away the tears. You've grown so much. You're so beautiful. Vivian's mind raced. How could she explain the years of hardship, the life she'd lived on the fringes of society? How could she bridge the chasm that separated the beggar girl from the heiress she was supposed to be? The questions swirled within her, a chaotic storm of doubt and uncertainty. Your father, he's gone, Vivian. Her mother's voice was soft, laced with a grief that mirrored her own. But your grandmother, she's alive. She's been waiting for you, all these years. Vivian's grandmother. Another piece of the puzzle, another figure emerging from the mists of her past. A wave of exhaustion washed over her. It was too much, too fast. She needed time to process, to understand the intricate tapestry of her life that was being unveiled before her. Your mother is here to find you, Vivian. From now on, live well with her. The deep, resonant voice cut through the haze of emotion. Vivian turned to see Louis standing in the doorway, his expression unreadable, a shadow of weariness etched around his eyes. He leaned against the frame, his posture relaxed, yet radiating an aura of power and control. His presence anchored her, a familiar point in the swirling chaos. Vivian's mother looked at Louis, her expression wary, questioning. The tension in the room was palpable, a silent battle of wills. Vivian's heart ached. She was caught between two worlds, two lives, two men who held a claim on her heart, albeit in vastly different ways. Louis. He had claimed her as his wife, a whirlwind marriage shrouded in mystery and manipulation. Yet, in the midst of the deception, she had glimpsed something genuine, a flicker of protectiveness, a hint of something deeper beneath the cold, calculating facade. He had saved her life, twice. He had shielded her from the storm, offering a sanctuary, albeit a gilded cage. And now, her mother, a tangible link to her past, to the life that had been stolen from her. A life she could reclaim, a chance to start anew, to heal the wounds of the past. The choice lay before her, stark and undeniable. No, Vivian said, her voice surprisingly firm, the words echoing in the sterile silence of the room. She looked at her mother, her heart heavy with the pain of the decision. I want to stay with him. The words hung in the air, a declaration, a commitment, a leap of faith into the unknown. Her mother's face crumpled, a mixture of hurt and confusion clouding her features. Vivian reached out, taking her hand, her touch a silent apology, a promise of a future connection. Louis's eyes met hers, a flicker of surprise, and something else relief. He pushed himself off the doorframe, crossing the room to stand beside her. He placed a hand on her shoulder, a possessive gesture that sent a shiver down her spine. It was a silent affirmation, a sealing of the pact they had unknowingly made. Vivian knew the road ahead would be fraught with challenges, with unraveling secrets and confronting the ghosts of the past. But for the first time in a long time, she felt a glimmer of hope, a sense of belonging, a fragile thread of connection in the vast labyrinth of her life. She had chosen her path, a path intertwined with Louis, a path shrouded in mystery and danger, yet a path that, for now, felt strangely right. The stale, recycled air of the hotel corridor pressed against Vivian's skin, a stark contrast to the crisp, autumnal breeze she craved. Each step was a labored effort, her ankle throbbing a dull, persistent rhythm beneath the bandage. Just days ago, the staff had fussed over her, their smiles as polished as the marble floors. Now, their gazes were cold, laced with a thinly veiled disdain. The bellhop, who once rushed to hold the door, pointedly ignored her, busying himself with an invisible speck of dust on a brass fixture. A maid, her lips pursed, muttered something about beggars can't be choosers under her breath as Vivian hobbled past. The shift in their demeanor was palpable, a chilling reminder of her precarious position. They know, a voice whispered in her mind. They know I'm not who I pretended to be, the opulent suite, once a sanctuary, now felt like a gilded cage. The plush carpet beneath her feet felt less like luxury and more like a suffocating embrace. She traced the outline of a delicate porcelain vase on the side table, its smooth surface a stark contrast to the roughness of her own calloused hands. The faint scent of lilies, once a soothing fragrance, now felt cloying, suffocating. Eve the name echoed in her thoughts, a bitter taste on her tongue. Eve Gwen. The woman who had orchestrated this charade, who had stripped her of her dignity and then, with a cruel twist of fate, returned it with a price tag she couldn't afford. The price of being Louis Leo's wife. A sharp rap at the door jolted her from her reverie. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the silence. It's her, she thought, a knot tightening in her stomach. It's Eve, she was right. Eve stood in the doorway, a vision of immaculate elegance in a tailored suit, her expression as sharp as the diamonds glittering on her earlobes. Xavier trailed behind her, his face a mask of bored indifference. Vivian braced herself, her hand instinctively going to her injured ankle. Well, look who it is, Eve drawled, her voice dripping with sarcasm. She sauntered into the room, her heels clicking against the marble floor like a predator's footsteps. Xavier followed, his gaze lingering on Vivian with a mixture of curiosity and contempt. Vivian met Eve's gaze, a flicker of defiance sparking in her eyes. Don't show fear, she told herself. Not now. Not ever, what brings you here, Eve? Vivian asked, her voice surprisingly steady. Eve let out a brittle laugh. Oh, just checking on my investment. Her eyes swept over Vivian, taking in her rumpled clothes, the bandage on her ankle, the faint shadows under her eyes. You look rough. The life of a beggar doesn't suit you, does it, darling? Vivian clenched her jaw, the muscles in her face tightening. I'm managing. Managing? Eve echoed, her voice laced with disbelief. Is that what you call it? Hobbling around a five-star hotel like a stray dog. I must say, Vivian, or should I say Eve? I'm disappointed. I expected more from a chase. The casual cruelty of Eve's words stung, a sharp slap across the face. Vivian's breath hitched in her throat, a wave of nausea washing over her. She fought to maintain her composure, her fingers digging into the palms of her hands. Don't react, she commanded herself. Don't give her the satisfaction, Xavier, who had remained silent until now, cleared his throat. What are you looking at? He sneered, his voice echoing Eve's condescending tone. If it weren't for your pretty face and efficient work, our five-star hotel wouldn't hire a cripple like you. The words hung in the air, thick with malice. Vivian felt a surge of anger, hot and potent, coursing through her veins. She wanted to lash out, to scream, to tear at their smug faces. But she held back, her gaze fixed on Eve, a silent challenge in her eyes. This isn't over, she thought, her mind racing. This is just the beginning, suddenly, the door swung open, revealing Louis, his face etched with a grim expression. The air in the room shifted, the tension thickening. He took in the scene before him, Eve's triumphant smirk, Xavier's sneering face, and Vivian's pale, defiant stance. His eyes, dark and unreadable, finally settled on Vivian. A flicker of something concern. Possessiveness? Flashed across his face before disappearing as quickly as it had appeared. What's going on here? He asked, his voice low and dangerous. The question hung in the air, a silent accusation. Eve's smile faltered, a flicker of uncertainty crossing her face. Xavier shifted uncomfortably, his bravado melting away under Louis's intense gaze. Vivian remained silent, her heart pounding against her ribs, a mixture of fear and anticipation churning in her stomach. She knew, with a chilling certainty, that everything was about to change. The game had just begun. And she was no longer a pawn. The opulence of the suite pressed down on Vivian, a suffocating contrast to the grimy alley she'd called home just days ago. Sunlight streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air, a stark reminder of how out of place she felt. Her hands, calloused and scarred, fidgeted with the hem of the borrowed dress. Eve's shrill laughter grated on her nerves, echoing off the polished marble floors. This is my life now, she thought, a bitter taste rising in her throat. Surrounded by enemies in a gilded cage. Eve, draped in a designer dress that screamed money and malice, circled Vivian like a predator. Xavier, her vapid shadow, hovered nearby, a smirk plastered on his face. Darling, you look absolutely dreadful, Eve drawled, her eyes raking over Vivian's appearance. Vivian met her gaze, a flicker of defiance in her own. Let them underestimate me. The thought, a mantra of survival from her past life, steadied her nerves. I didn't realize the fashion police were patrolling hotel suites now, Vivian retorted, her voice surprisingly steady. Inside, a storm raged. Fear warred with a nascent anger, a protective instinct ignited by Eve's open disdain. Oh, Vivian, darling, Eve purred, her voice dripping with false sweetness. You misunderstand. I'm merely concerned. After all, Louis has a reputation to uphold. And you let's just say you don't exactly fit the image of a men's group CEO's wife. Vivian's jaw tightened. Eve's words, though barbed, held a kernel of truth. She felt a pang of resentment towards Louis. He'd thrust her into this world, this life, without preparation, without warning. He uses me as a pawn in his game. The thought twisted in her gut, a sharp, acidic burn. Xavier, sensing an opportunity to ingratiate himself with Eve, chimed in, "How could I possibly be interested in a cripple like you?" His words, laced with cruel amusement, hit Vivian with the force of a physical blow. The old wound on her leg throbbed, a phantom pain echoing the real injury. He sees only weakness. She clenched her fists, fighting the urge to lash out. The hotel staff, drawn by the commotion, stood awkwardly near the door, their expressions a mixture of curiosity and apprehension. One of them, a young bellhop, shifted nervously, his gaze darting between Vivian and Eve. "They're all watching," Vivian realized, waiting for me to break. The thought fueled her resolve. She wouldn't give them the satisfaction. "Your staff here is extremely rude," Vivian stated, her voice calm despite the turmoil within. She addressed the manager, a portly man sweating profusely in his starched uniform. "I expect an apology." The manager, caught in the crossfire, stammered, "Ma'am, I apologize for any inconvenience." His eyes flickered towards Eve, seeking guidance. The subtle shift in his gaze, the deferential tone, spoke volumes. "They fear her power," Vivian observed, "more than they respect my position." Eve's laughter, sharp and brittle, filled the room. "Inconvenience? My dear, you are the inconvenience." She turned to Xavier. "Finish him off." Xavier, emboldened by Eve's command, lunged forward, his hand raised to strike. Vivian braced herself, her mind racing. "I won't be a victim." She sidestepped, narrowly avoiding the blow, a surge of adrenaline coursing through her veins. Just as Xavier prepared to strike again, the suite door swung open, revealing Louis. He stood framed in the doorway, his expression unreadable. The air in the room thickened, charged with a sudden tension. The hotel staff froze, their faces masks of fear. Eve's triumphant smirk faltered, replaced by a carefully crafted mask of innocence. Louis's gaze swept over the scene, taking in the disheveled room, the tense postures of the staff, and Vivian's defiant stance. His eyes finally settled on Xavier, whose hand was still raised mid-strike. A flicker of something cold and dangerous flashed in Louis's eyes. "What is the meaning of this?" His voice, low and controlled, sent a shiver down Vivian's spine. Despite the fear that tightened her chest, she felt a strange sense of relief. "He's here." "Louis, darling," Eve crooned, her voice dripping with feigned concern. This woman was causing a scene. Xavier was simply trying to calm things down. Louis ignored her, his gaze still fixed on Xavier. "You," he said, his voice cutting through the air like ice. "You're fired." Xavier's jaw dropped. He stammered, but Mr. Louis cut him off with a wave of his hand. "Security will escort you out." He turned to the manager, his voice laced with steel. "And you," he said, his gaze piercing, "I expect better control of your staff. This is unacceptable." The manager, his face ashen, stammered apologies, bowing repeatedly. Louis turned his attention to Vivian, his expression softening ever so slightly. He crossed the room, his steps measured and deliberate. He stood before her, his presence a tangible force. He reached out, his hand gently cupping her cheek. The unexpected touch sent a jolt of electricity through her. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice low and husky. Vivian met his gaze, her heart pounding in her chest. She wanted to pull away, to reject his touch, but something held her back. A strange mixture of fear, resentment, and longing? He plays his role well, she thought, the concerned husband. I'm fine, she replied, her voice barely a whisper. The lie tasted like ash in her mouth. Louis's thumb brushed against her cheekbone, a feather-light touch that sent shivers down her spine. Good, he murmured, his eyes searching hers. He turned to Eve, his expression hardening once more. We'll be leaving now. He took Vivian's hand, his grip firm but gentle, and led her out of the suite, leaving Eve and the stunned hotel staff in their wake. As they walked down the hallway, Vivian felt a strange sense of unreality. The events of the past few minutes swirled in her mind, a kaleidoscope of emotions. Fear, anger, confusion, and a flicker of something else, something she couldn't quite name. What is this game he's playing? The question echoed in her mind, a disquieting whisper in the opulent silence of the hotel corridor. They emerged into the bustling lobby and Louis guided her toward the exit, his grip tightening on her hand. Suddenly, Vivian stumbled, her injured leg buckling beneath her. Louis reacted instantly, his arm wrapping around her waist, supporting her weight. Careful, he murmured, his voice laced with concern. He helped her into the waiting car, settling her gently into the back seat. As the car pulled away from the hotel, Vivian leaned back against the plush leather, her eyes closed. The throbbing in her leg was a constant reminder of her vulnerability. He saved me, she thought, but why? The question lingered, unanswered, a puzzle piece in the complex game they were playing. The car sped towards the hospital, the cityscape blurring past the windows. Vivian opened her eyes, her gaze fixed on the receding buildings. This is my new battlefield, she thought, a steely resolve hardening her gaze. And I will learn to fight. The opulent chandeliers of the Grand Hyatt cast a shimmering light across the polished marble floor, reflecting in the wide, disbelieving eyes of the hotel staff. Eve Gwen, her designer handbag clutched like a shield, stood her ground, her voice echoing through the cavernous lobby. The Gwen Group is your biggest client, losing this deal, and you'll all be out of a job. Her words, sharp and laced with desperation, hung in the air, a stark contrast to the hushed whispers that had followed her dramatic entrance. Internally, she seethed. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. Louis Leo, that emotionless statue, should have been groveling at her feet, begging her to reconsider. Instead, he stood there, an impenetrable wall of indifference, his arm protectively around the waif he called his wife. Vivian, still slightly trembling from the shock of the revelation, felt Louis's grip tighten around her shoulders. His warmth, a stark contrast to the icy fear that had gripped her only moments ago, seeped into her, a fragile shield against the venom in Eve's gaze. Just a short while ago, she was a nameless beggar, scraping for existence. Now, she was Vivian Chase Leo, heiress and wife, a pawn in a game she was only beginning to understand. The thought, dizzying and terrifying, sent a shiver down her spine. This sudden shift, from destitution to opulence, felt surreal, like a dream she might wake from at any moment. She stole a glance at Louis, his profile sharp and resolute against the backdrop of the ornate lobby. What was he thinking? What were his motivations? The questions swirled in her mind, a chaotic symphony of doubt and uncertainty. Xavier, Eve's boyfriend, shifted uneasily beside her. He tugged at the sleeve of her jacket, his eyes darting nervously towards the gathering crowd. This confrontation wasn't part of the plan. He'd envisioned a smooth, discreet transaction, a quick exchange of money for silence. Now, with Louis's unwavering gaze fixed on them, he felt a knot of anxiety tighten in his stomach. He could practically smell the burning bridges, the acrid scent of a deal gone sour. "Eve, let's just go," he muttered, his voice barely audible above the hushed murmurs of the onlookers. Eve shot him a venomous glare. "Don't be ridiculous, Xavier. I'm not leaving until this is resolved." Her pride, bruised and battered, wouldn't allow her to retreat. How could she, Eve Gwen, be outmaneuvered by this nobody? This beggar pretending to be Vivian Chase? The thought was a bitter pill, hard to swallow. Yet, a flicker of doubt, small and insidious, began to creep into her mind. What if it was true? What if this woman really was the missing heiress? The possibility, however remote, sent a chill down her spine. Lewis's voice, calm and measured, cut through the tension. The deal is off, Ms. Gwen. I suggest you leave before I call security. His words, devoid of any emotion, held a chilling finality. He barely spared Eve a glance, his attention focused solely on Vivian, his hand gently stroking her arm in a gesture that was both protective and possessive. Vivian flinched at his touch, her body still taut with residual fear. She felt a strange mix of gratitude and unease towards this man who was both her savior and her captor. His motivations remained a mystery, a puzzle she desperately needed to solve. Was this genuine concern or simply another layer of his intricate game? She couldn't tell. His eyes, dark and unreadable, gave nothing away. Eve's face contorted in a mixture of fury and disbelief. You dare threaten me? After everything I've done for you? Her voice cracked, the carefully constructed facade of composure finally crumbling. The realization that she had lost, truly and irrevocably lost, hit her with the force of a physical blow. Xavier, sensing the impending implosion, tightened his grip on Eve's arm. Come on, Eve. It's over. He pulled her towards the exit, his voice strained with urgency. He needed to get her out of there, away from the curious stares and the palpable tension. This whole situation was a disaster, a train wreck in slow motion. Eve, still reeling from the shock, allowed herself to be dragged away, her parting shot a venomous glare directed at Vivian. This isn't over, she hissed, her voice barely a whisper. As the doors of the Grand Hyatt swung shut behind them, a palpable silence descended upon the lobby. The staff, still stunned by the spectacle, slowly dispersed, their whispers trailing behind them like wisps of smoke. Lewis turned to Vivian, his expression softening. Are you all right? He asked, his voice low and gentle, a stark contrast to the icy tone he had used with Eve. Vivian nodded, her throat too tight to speak. She felt a strange sense of detachment, as if she were watching the events unfold from a distance. The opulent lobby, the hushed whispers, the lingering scent of expensive perfume, it all felt unreal, like a scene from a movie. Let's go, Lewis said, gently guiding her towards the exit. We need to get you to a hospital. The drive to the hospital was a blur. Vivian sat beside Lewis, her mind racing, trying to piece together the fragments of information she had gathered. The Chase fortune, the arranged marriage, Eve's animosity, it was all too much to process. She stole a glance at Lewis, his profile etched against the city lights. He seemed lost in thought, his brow furrowed in concentration. What was he thinking? Did he truly care about her well-being, or was this just another calculated move in his intricate game? The hospital, a sterile and brightly lit space, felt like a sanctuary after the chaos of the hotel lobby. Doctors and nurses bustled around, their voices hushed and efficient. Vivian, still feeling disoriented, allowed herself to be guided through the maze of corridors, her hand clasped tightly in Lewis's. His touch, firm and reassuring, anchored her to the present, a lifeline in the swirling vortex of her thoughts. As they waited for the doctor's assessment, Lewis sat beside Vivian, his silence comforting rather than awkward. She could feel his gaze on her, a tangible presence in the sterile room. She wanted to ask him so many questions, to unravel the mystery surrounding her identity and their marriage. But the words wouldn't come. She felt a strange mix of fear and anticipation, a sense of standing on the precipice of a great unknown. The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken words and unanswered questions, yet interwoven with a strange, nascent intimacy. The chaos of the day began to recede, replaced by a quiet understanding, a fragile connection forged in the crucible of shared secrets and hidden truths. The sterile scent of antiseptic hung heavy in the air, a stark contrast to the opulent perfume Vivian still faintly smelled on her clothes from the hotel. It clung to her, a ghostly reminder of the life she'd glimpsed, a life that was rightfully hers, yet felt so alien. The harsh fluorescent lights of the hospital corridor buzzed overhead, their cold glow illuminating the worried faces of her family huddled around her grandmother's room. Her father paced, his hands clasped behind his back, his usual jovial demeanor replaced by a deep frown. He looked older, smaller, the weight of the world pressing down on his already stooped shoulders. Vivian's heart ached. Had all of this chaos and fear, been her fault? Had her sudden reappearance brought this danger upon them? Her grandmother's frail hand, papery thin and riddled with age spots, gripped hers with surprising strength. The rhythmic beeping of the heart monitor filled the small, sterile room, a steady pulse in the tense silence. Vivian stared at the rise and fall of the thin blanket covering her grandmother's chest, each shallow breath a fragile testament to life. Her grandmother's eyes, usually bright and twinkling with mischief, were now closed, her face pale and drawn. A wave of nausea washed over Vivian. She'd been so close to losing her, to losing the only family she had left. The thought sent a shiver down her spine, a cold dread settling in the pit of her stomach. She swallowed hard, trying to push back the rising panic. She had to be strong, for her father, for her grandmother. She had to face whatever came next. Suddenly, a commotion erupted in the hallway. Shouts and the sound of scuffling feet echoed through the quiet corridor. Vivian's father rushed to the door, his face etched with fear. Before he could open it, two men, their faces obscured by baseball caps and dark sunglasses, burst into the room. One lunged towards Vivian's grandmother, a glint of metal flashing in his hand. "Stop her!" Vivian screamed, her voice raw with terror. She instinctively moved to shield her grandmother, her body trembling with a mixture of fear and adrenaline. Time seemed to slow down. Vivian braced herself for the impact, closing her eyes, waiting for the inevitable. But it never came. Instead, she heard a thud, a grunt of pain, and the sound of something heavy hitting the floor. She cautiously opened her eyes to see Louis standing between her and the attackers, his expression cold and hard, his movements swift and precise. He'd moved with a speed that was almost inhuman, disarming the first attacker with a single, fluid motion. The second man hesitated, momentarily stunned by Louis's unexpected intervention. "Let go of Vivian." Louis's voice was low and menacing, cutting through the chaos like a sharpened blade. His eyes, dark and intense, were fixed on the remaining attacker. There was a chilling aura of power around him, an unmistakable threat that radiated from every inch of his being. The attacker, realizing he was outmatched, quickly retreated, pulling his fallen comrade with him. They disappeared down the hallway as quickly as they'd come, leaving behind a stunned silence. Vivian stared at Louis, her heart pounding in her chest. He stood there, a protective barrier between her and the danger that had just threatened to tear her world apart. He looked different here, in the harsh fluorescent light of the hospital, stripped of the polished veneer of the corporate world. There was a rawness to him, a vulnerability she hadn't seen before. He was still the powerful CEO, the enigmatic figure who commanded attention wherever he went, but there was something more, something beneath the surface that she couldn't quite decipher. Had he really changed? Could she trust this sudden shift in his demeanor, this unexpected display of concern? Louis turned to her, his eyes softening slightly as they met hers. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice gentler now, laced with a concern that seemed genuine. Vivian nodded, unable to speak. A lump formed in her throat, a strange mixture of relief and confusion swirling within her. She wanted to believe him, to believe in the protective shield he seemed to have cast around her, but years of hardship and betrayal had taught her to be wary, to question every motive, every gesture of kindness. Could this be real? Could Louis Leo, the man who had orchestrated her downfall, truly be her protector? Louis's gaze lingered on her for a moment longer, searching, questioning. Then, he turned his attention to her grandmother, his expression hardening again. He barked orders at the nurses, demanding answers, his voice filled with authority. He moved with a sense of purpose, taking charge of the situation, ensuring that her grandmother received the best possible care. He spoke to the doctors, his tone sharp and demanding, leaving no room for excuses or delays. Vivian watched him, her mind racing. This wasn't the Louis she knew, the cold, calculating businessman who had used her and discarded her without a second thought. This was a different man, a man she couldn't quite comprehend. Was this an act, a carefully crafted performance designed to further manipulate her? Or was there something more to it, something deeper, something real? The questions swirled in her mind, unanswered, unresolved. The only certainty was the strange, unsettling flutter in her chest, a flicker of hope in the darkness that had enveloped her life for so long. She couldn't explain it, couldn't rationalize it, but in that sterile hospital room, surrounded by the scent of antiseptic and the rhythmic beeping of the heart monitor, Vivian felt a sliver of something she hadn't felt in a long time, safe. The opulent hotel suite, bathed in the soft morning light filtering through the sheer curtains, felt like a world away from the grimy alley where she'd spent the last few months. Vivian watched the dust motes dance in the sunbeams, a strange sense of detachment washing over her. Just yesterday, she was Eve, the beggar, scraping by on the fringes of society. Now, she was Vivian Chase, heiress to a fortune she barely knew existed, wife to a man whose eyes held secrets she couldn't decipher. She traced the rim of the delicate china cup, the warmth seeping into her chilled fingers. Her hand still trembled slightly, a lingering echo of the confrontation with Eve, Gwen and Xavier. The raw anger, the fear, the dizzying rush of revelation, it was all still too fresh, too raw. Louis had promised to handle everything, to ensure her safety, to reclaim what was rightfully hers. But could she truly trust him? His actions spoke louder than any words, his swift, decisive intervention, the steely glint in his eyes as he faced down Eve Gwen. Yet, a part of her, hardened by years of solitude and betrayal, remained wary. A soft knock at the door broke her reverie. Louis entered, his presence filling the room with a quiet intensity. He held a garment bag, his expression unreadable. The hospital called. Your father has regained consciousness. His voice was low, devoid of inflection, yet Vivian sensed a subtle shift in his demeanor, a softening around the edges. She swallowed, the lump in her throat making it hard to speak. "You want to see him." The words were barely a whisper, but Louis heard. He nodded, a flicker of something akin to understanding in his dark eyes. "I'll take you." He placed the garment bag on the bed. "Change. This should be more comfortable." Inside, Vivian found a simple, elegant dress, the fabric soft against her skin. It felt foreign, luxurious, a stark contrast to the ragged clothes she was accustomed to. As she changed, her reflection in the full-length mirror caught her eye. Gone were the grime and shadows, replaced by a fragile beauty, a vulnerability that both frightened and empowered her. Was this truly her? Vivian Chase, the heiress? Or was it just another mask, another role she was forced to play? She closed her eyes, taking a deep breath, trying to steady the tumultuous emotions swirling within her. Louis's words echoed in her mind, your father. A father she barely remembered, a family she never knew. What would she say to him? How could she bridge the chasm of years, of lost time and stolen opportunities? The drive to the hospital was filled with a strained silence. Vivian stared out the window, the city blurring past in a kaleidoscope of colors and shapes. Her thoughts were a tangled mess of apprehension, hope, and a lingering sense of disbelief. Louis, seemingly sensing her unease, reached out, his hand covering hers briefly. The touch was warm, firm, a silent reassurance. Vivian's heart skipped a beat, a strange warmth spreading through her chest. She glanced at him, surprised by the intensity of his gaze. He quickly withdrew his hand, his expression once again impassive. But the lingering warmth of his touch remained, a tangible connection in the charged silence. The sterile white walls of the hospital felt oppressive, the antiseptic smell sharp and stinging. The Chase family lawyer met them at the entrance, his face etched with a mixture of relief and concern. "Mr. Chase is weak, but stable," he explained, leading them through the labyrinthine corridors. "He's been asking for you, Miss Chase. He remembers everything." Vivian's breath hitched. Everything? Did that mean he remembered the night of the accident? The fire that had supposedly claimed her mother's life? The questions clawed at her throat, but she remained silent, her heart pounding against her ribs. Stepping into the private room, Vivian felt a wave of emotions wash over her. Her father lay in the hospital bed, frail and pale, hooked up to a myriad of machines. But his eyes, though weak, held a spark of recognition, a flicker of the love she had craved for so long. He reached out a trembling hand, his voice hoarse with emotion. "Vivian.my daughter." Tears welled up in Vivian's eyes, blurring her vision. She rushed to his side, her hand clasping his. "Father." The word felt foreign yet familiar, a whispered promise of a connection she thought she'd lost forever. Louis remained by the door, a silent observer, his presence a steady anchor in the turbulent sea of emotions. He watched the reunion unfold, his expression unreadable, yet Vivian sensed a subtle shift in his demeanor, a quiet understanding that resonated deep within her. Later, after her father had drifted back to sleep, Louis drew Vivian aside. "The police are investigating Eve, Gwen and Xavier," he said, his voice low and serious. "They won't be bothering you again." Vivian nodded, a sense of relief washing over her. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. He looked at her, his gaze intense, searching. "You don't have to thank me, Vivian. You're my wife. Protecting you is me responsibility." His words, though spoken with his usual detached tone, held a hidden depth, a subtle possessiveness that sent a shiver down her spine. Vivian met his gaze, her heart pounding in her chest. She wanted to believe him, to trust in the fragile bond that was forming between them. But the shadows of the past, the years of loneliness and betrayal, still lingered, whispering doubts in her ear. As they left the hospital, the setting sun painted the sky in hues of orange and purple. Vivian leaned against Louis, a weariness settling over her, but also a flicker of hope. He placed his arm around her, drawing her closer, his touch a silent comfort. "We'll get through this together," he murmured, his voice barely audible. Vivian closed her eyes, savoring the warmth of his embrace, the feeling of belonging, of finally having someone on her side. The road ahead was uncertain, filled with challenges and unanswered questions. But for the first time in a long time, Vivian didn't feel alone. She had Louis, her enigmatic husband, her protector, her unexpected ally. And in that moment, as the city lights began to twinkle in the gathering dusk, she dared to believe that maybe, just maybe, they could build a future together, a future where trust and love could blossom amidst the ruins of the past. The sterile scent of antiseptic hung heavy in the air, a stark contrast to the opulent perfume that still clung faintly to Vivian's threadbare clothes. The crisp white sheets of the hospital bed felt cool against her skin, a welcome change from the rough pavement she'd called home for weeks. Her gaze drifted towards the window, the city lights blurring into a hazy, indifferent glow. "Just like my future," she thought, the bitterness creeping into her thoughts like a persistent chill. Her mother's shallow breaths from the next bed were a constant, painful reminder of the weight on her shoulders. Love lost, job gone, and now this. The world seemed determined to crush her, one misfortune at a time. She closed her eyes, the image of Louis Leo's impassive face flashing through her mind. His offer, his strange, almost possessive concern, was a lifeline, albeit one she wasn't sure she wanted to grasp. The Leo family, they seemed like a good choice. A necessary choice. The rhythmic tap of leather shoes against the linoleum floor announced Louis's return. He carried a small paper bag, the aroma of warm food escaping from within. He placed it on the bedside table, his movements precise, almost clinical. "I brought some congee. The doctor said your mother should be able to eat something light soon." His voice was low, devoid of the usual coldness she had come to expect. Vivian watched him, her heart a turbulent mix of suspicion and a flicker of gratitude. He doesn't have to do this, she thought, the realization a sharp pang in her chest. He could have just left the money and walked away. She swallowed, her throat suddenly dry. "Thank you." He nodded, his gaze lingering on her face for a moment longer than necessary. What is he looking for? She wondered, her hand instinctively going to her cheek, as if to smooth away the grime and exhaustion. She could almost feel the weight of his scrutiny, dissecting her, peeling back the layers of her carefully constructed facade. He pulled a chair closer to the bed and sat down, the silence stretching between them, thick with unspoken words and unanswered questions. "The doctors say your mother needs specialized care," he finally said, his voice breaking the tense quiet. "It's expensive." He didn't elaborate, but the unspoken implication hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. Vivian knew. She'd seen the bills, the exorbitant costs that were far beyond her reach. She closed her eyes briefly, a wave of despair washing over her. "I'm trapped," she thought, the realization a cold knot in her stomach. With nowhere left to turn. I don't know what to do," she whispered, her voice barely audible. She felt his gaze on her, intense, unwavering. It was a strange sensation, being seen, truly seen, by someone who held so much power over her future. She felt exposed, vulnerable, like a specimen under a microscope. "There's a way," he said, his voice soft, almost gentle. He paused, as if weighing his words carefully. "Marry me." The words hung in the air, shocking in their simplicity, their audacity. Vivian stared at him, her mind reeling. Marry him? This man, this enigmatic stranger who seemed to hold all the cards, who had plucked her from the streets and offered her a life she couldn't comprehend. It's madness, she thought, her heart pounding in her chest. Utter, beautiful madness. Why? She finally managed to ask, her voice trembling. She needed to understand, to dissect his motives, to find the hidden agenda beneath his offer. He met her gaze, his eyes dark, unreadable. Your mother needs care. I can provide that. His voice was flat, devoid of emotion, yet Vivian sensed something else beneath the surface, something she couldn't quite decipher. Protection? She wondered. Or something more? And what do you get in return? She asked, her voice laced with suspicion. The world had taught her to be wary, to question every act of kindness, to search for the hidden cost. He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he looked away, his gaze fixed on the cityscape outside the window. The silence stretched, taut with unspoken truths and hidden agendas. Finally, he turned back to her, his expression unreadable. I get peace of mind, he said, his voice low, almost a whisper. And perhaps a chance to right a wrong. Vivian stared at him, her mind racing. A wrong? She thought. What wrong could he possibly be referring to? She knew nothing about him, about his life, about the reasons behind his strange obsession with her. But she knew one thing, she was out of options. Her mother's life hung in the balance, and Louis Leo held the key to her survival. She closed her eyes, taking a deep breath. Love was lost, her job was gone, and her mother needed medical fees. The Leo family, with all their complexities and hidden motives, seemed like her only choice. "Okay," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I'll marry you." The words felt heavy, final, a sentence pronounced on her own life. She felt a strange sense of detachment, as if she were watching this scene unfold from a distance, observing her own surrender. "What am I doing?" she wondered, a flicker of panic rising in her chest. "Am I selling myself to the devil for my mother's life?" Louis nodded, his expression unchanged. He reached out, his hand hovering over hers for a moment before gently closing it in his grasp. His touch was surprisingly warm, a stark contrast to his cold demeanor. "Good," he said, his voice soft, almost tender. "I'll make the arrangements." He rose to his feet, his gaze lingering on her face for a moment longer. Then, he turned and walked away, his footsteps echoing in the sterile silence of the hospital room. Vivian watched him go, her heart a turbulent mix of fear, hope, and a strange, unsettling sense of anticipation. She had made her choice. She had chosen her mother's life over her own freedom. And in doing so, she had stepped into a world she didn't understand, a world of secrets, lies, and perhaps something more. She looked at her mother, her frail form barely visible beneath the hospital blankets. "For you, Mama," she thought, a single tear tracing a path down her cheek. "For you, I'll face whatever comes next." The opulent dining hall of the Leo estate hummed with a low, constant murmur, the clinking of crystal against china a delicate counterpoint to the hushed conversations. Vivian sat at the long mahogany table, a small island in a sea of expectant faces. She could feel the weight of their gazes, assessing, dissecting, each one a silent interrogation. The air itself felt thick, suffocating, laced with the unspoken questions that danced behind their polite smiles. "They know," she thought, her stomach twisting into a tight knot. "They all know who I really am." This wasn't the nervous flutter of a beggar girl facing the unknown, it was the chilling certainty of a woman stepping back into a world that had once cast her out. Louis sat beside her, a steady, unwavering presence in the storm. His hand rested lightly on her back, a silent reassurance, a subtle declaration of solidarity. She hadn't anticipated this. His public acknowledgement, the quiet strength in his touch, it was a language she hadn't learned to decipher yet. He turned to her, his gaze soft, a flicker of something unreadable in its depths. "Are you all right?" he murmured, his voice low enough for only her to hear. Vivian managed a small, tight smile. "Just overwhelmed," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. Overwhelmed by the pretense, the hypocrisy, the sheer audacity of it all, her inner voice screamed. How easily they transitioned, these people, from disdainful rejection to cautious acceptance, now that her true identity was revealed. How fluidly their masks shifted, their smiles widening, their voices honeyed. "It's understandable, dear," a woman with a carefully coiffed silver bob and piercing blue eyes said from across the table. This was Eleanor Leo, Louis's mother, the matriarch of the family. Her smile didn't quite reach her eyes. "It's a lot to take in, returning to your rightful place after so long." The words hung in the air, heavy with implication. Returning. As though she'd chosen to leave, as though she hadn't been robbed of her birthright, forced to live a life of hardship and anonymity. "Indeed," Louis interjected smoothly, his voice carrying a subtle warning. "Vivian has been through a great deal. We should all be mindful of that." He squeezed her hand gently, a silent message passing between them. "I see you. I understand." The conversation flowed around them, a swirling eddy of polite inquiries about Vivian's adjustment, veiled concerns about her health, and thinly disguised curiosity about her past. Each question felt like a probing finger, testing the boundaries of her composure, searching for cracks in her facade. Vivian answered with carefully chosen words, revealing just enough to satisfy their curiosity without betraying the bitterness that simmered beneath the surface. Later, as the dessert course was being served, a young man with a boyish grin and an air of entitlement approached them. "Cousin Louis," he said, his voice dripping with false cordiality. "And Vivian, wasn't it? It's remarkable, this whole situation. Truly a story for the ages." This was Damien, a distant relative, known for his gossipmongering and insatiable thirst for drama. Louis's grip on Vivian's hand tightened. "Damien," he acknowledged, his voice cool and devoid of any warmth. "I was just saying," Damien continued, oblivious to the warning signs, "how unexpected it all is. To find the missing Chase heiress living as a beggar. It's almost unbelievable." Vivian felt a surge of anger, hot and sharp, rising in her chest. Unbelievable. She wanted to scream. "You were all too quick to believe I was nothing, to dismiss me, to erase me from your memories." Before she could respond, Louis stood, his chair scraping against the polished floor. The sudden movement drew the attention of the entire room. He looked down at Damien, his eyes like chips of ice. "Damien," he said, his voice dangerously low, "I suggest you choose your words more carefully." The air crackled with unspoken tension. Damien stammered, his face paling. I didn't mean any offense," Louis cut him off, his gaze unwavering. "None taken," he said, his voice laced with steel. "Just a reminder that Vivian is my wife, and any disrespect towards her is a disrespect towards me." The message was clear, delivered with the ruthless efficiency that had made Louis Leo a legend in the business world. Silence descended upon the dining hall, broken only by the rhythmic ticking of the grandfather clock in the corner. Damien mumbled an apology and retreated, his face burning with shame. Later that evening, at the hospital, after a minor incident involving Vivian's fragile health, Louis sat by her bedside, watching her sleep. The harsh lines of his face had softened, replaced by an expression of tenderness that Vivian had never seen before. He reached out, his fingers gently tracing the contours of her face. His touch was light, almost hesitant, as though he were afraid to break something precious. Why? She wondered, her thoughts drifting in the hazy space between sleep and wakefulness. Why this sudden shift, this unexpected protectiveness? Was it guilt? A sense of obligation? Or was there something more, something deeper, simmering beneath the surface? Louis leaned closer, his breath warm against her cheek. "Don't worry," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "I won't let anyone hurt you again." The words hung in the air, a promise, a vow, a declaration of something she couldn't quite comprehend. Vivian's heart fluttered in her chest, a strange mixture of fear and hope. She wanted to believe him, to trust in the sincerity of his words, but the scars of the past ran deep, a constant reminder of the fragility of trust, the fleeting nature of promises. Yet, as she looked into his eyes, she saw a flicker of something genuine, something real, buried beneath layers of carefully constructed defenses. And for the first time since she'd stepped back into this world of wealth and deception, a sliver of hope pierced through the darkness. Perhaps, just perhaps, there was more to Louis Leo than met the eye. The opulent chandeliers of the hotel ballroom cast long, distorted shadows as Vivian walked away, the echoing silence a stark contrast to the cacophony of accusations that had just filled the air. Her hand, still tingling from the slap Eve Gwen had delivered, instinctively rose to her cheek. The sting was a physical manifestation of the deeper wound, the betrayal by the people she had once considered family. They never truly saw me, she thought, the realization a cold, hard knot in her stomach. Even when I was playing the role of the destitute Vivian Chase, they only saw what they wanted to see. Louis, a figure of granite stillness amidst the swirling chaos, followed her. His silence was more unsettling than any outburst could have been. She could feel the weight of his gaze, heavy on her back, but she couldn't bring herself to face him. The revelation of their marriage hung in the air, thick and suffocating. What was he thinking? Was this part of his grand plan? Another layer of the intricate game he seemed to be perpetually playing. The cool night air against her skin was a welcome relief from the stifling atmosphere of the ballroom. She drew a shaky breath, trying to steady the tremor in her hands. The city lights blurred through the film of unshed tears in her eyes. I should be happy, she told herself, free from their charade, from their suffocating pity. But the hollow ache in her chest spoke a different truth. Vivian. His voice, a low rumble, broke the silence. She stopped, her back still to him, every muscle tense. She could hear the measured rhythm of his footsteps approaching, each one a drumbeat against her frayed nerves. We need to talk. The words were simple, devoid of emotion, yet they sent a shiver down her spine. She turned slowly, bracing herself for the inevitable confrontation. His expression was unreadable, his eyes, those deep pools of obsidian, giving nothing away. It was a look she had come to both fear and strangely crave. About what? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. He stepped closer, the subtle scent of his cologne filling her senses, a familiar comfort in the midst of the turmoil. About everything. The drive to the hospital was a blur. The muted conversation with Louis, punctuated by long stretches of silence, offered no solace. He explained the legal complexities of her situation, the implications of her reclaimed identity, his voice a steady monotone. But she barely heard him. Her mind was a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. Relief, anger, confusion, a flicker of something akin to hope. The sterile white walls of the hospital room felt suffocating. Her grandmother, frail and pale, lay in the bed, hooked up to a myriad of machines. The rhythmic beeping was a constant reminder of her fragility. Guilt gnawed at Vivian's conscience. She hadn't seen her grandmother in years, not since she had run away, desperate to escape the suffocating control of the Chase family. Her father sat by the bedside, his face etched with worry. He looked up as they entered, his eyes widening in surprise. Vivian? He whispered, his voice thick with emotion. She nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. The years of estrangement, the bitterness, the resentment, seemed to melt away in the face of his obvious concern. He rose to his feet, his movements hesitant, as if he wasn't sure how to approach her. You're alive. I am, she replied, her voice trembling. The conversation was stilted, awkward. They danced around the unspoken truths, the years of hurt and misunderstanding. Her father spoke of her grandmother's declining health, the stroke that had left her incapacitated. He spoke of the family business, the pressures he had faced in her absence. She listened, her heart aching with a mixture of sadness and a strange sense of belonging. Louis stood by the window, a silent observer. His presence was a constant reminder of the complicated web of relationships that bound them together. She could feel his gaze on her, a silent question hanging in the air. Later, after her father had left, Louis approached the bedside. He stood for a long moment, looking down at her grandmother, his expression unreadable. Then, to Vivian's utter astonishment, he reached out and took her hand. His touch was warm, reassuring. It sent a jolt of electricity through her, a spark of something she hadn't realized she was missing. She looked up at him, her eyes questioning. He didn't speak, but his grip tightened on her hand. In that single gesture, a silent promise, a flicker of vulnerability she had never seen before. It was a moment of unexpected intimacy, a shared understanding that transcended words. He's not just protecting me, she realized with a sudden clarity, he cares. The thought, so unexpected, so fragile, bloomed in her chest, a tiny flower pushing through the cracks of her hardened heart. The night stretched on, long and filled with unspoken emotions. The rhythmic beeping of the machines, the soft murmur of nurses in the hallway, the steady rhythm of Louis's breathing beside her, it all blended into a strange lullaby. She sat beside her grandmother, holding her frail hand, lost in a sea of memories. The happy childhood days, the growing rift between her and her family, the desperate escape, the years of loneliness and hardship. It was as if her entire life was flashing before her eyes, a kaleidoscope of joy and pain, regret and resilience. As dawn broke, painting the sky in hues of pink and gold, Vivian felt a shift within her. The anger, the bitterness, the fear, it all seemed to fade, replaced by a newfound sense of purpose. She had faced her past, confronted her demons, and emerged, scarred but not broken. The road ahead was uncertain, filled with challenges she couldn't even begin to imagine. But for the first time in a long time, she didn't feel alone. She had Louis, enigmatic and complex as he was, by her side. And in that moment, that was enough. The sterile scent of antiseptic hung heavy in the air, a stark contrast to the opulent perfume Vivian was accustomed to, a ghost of a life she'd barely begun to reclaim. She sat on the edge of the crisp white hospital bed, the starched sheets a cold reminder of the distance between her and the warmth of Louis's embrace. The rhythmic beeping of the heart monitor echoed the unsteady beat of her own heart, a frantic drum against her ribs. How easily her world had shattered, only to be painstakingly pieced back together by the man she'd both feared and yearned for. The door creaked open, admitting her father, his face etched with a mixture of relief and guilt. He moved towards her with a hesitant shuffle, his eyes searching hers. "Vivian," he began, his voice thick with emotion, I don't know what to say." Vivian watched him, a flicker of something akin to amusement twisting her lips. "He doesn't know what to say." The thought echoed in her mind, tinged with a bitter irony. For years, he'd had nothing to say to the daughter he'd abandoned. Now, words seemed to fail him. "Perhaps an apology," she suggested, her voice soft yet edged with steel. He flinched as if struck. I am sorry, Vivian. For everything." He reached for her hand, but she pulled away, the gesture too little, too late. "Sorry doesn't erase the years of neglect, the gnawing hunger, the constant fear. Apologies are meaningless without change, Father." Her gaze was unwavering, reflecting the newfound strength that bloomed within her, nurtured by Louis's unexpected protection. Her grandmother entered then, her frail frame a stark contrast to the iron will in her eyes. She approached Vivian, her hand outstretched not in apology, but in a gesture of possession. "My granddaughter," she murmured, her voice raspy with age. "You've caused quite the stir." Granddaughter. The word tasted like ash in Vivian's mouth. This woman, who had orchestrated her downfall, now claimed her as kin. Vivian met her gaze, unflinching. "And you, grandmother, have played quite the game." The old woman's eyes narrowed. "You're a chase. You belong with us." Vivian's laugh was short and sharp. Belong? The concept felt alien, a twisted mockery of the connection she craved. "I belong with myself," she corrected, her voice laced with conviction. "And perhaps," she added, her gaze softening as she thought of Louis, "with someone who truly sees me." Later, as the shadows lengthened in the hospital room, Louis arrived. He moved towards her with a quiet grace that belied the power he held. He didn't speak, merely took her hand in his thumb gently stroking her knuckles. The warmth of his touch chased away the lingering chill of the hospital, a silent promise of safety and belonging. "He sees me," she thought, a wave of emotion washing over her, so intense it threatened to drown her. It wasn't the fairy tale romance she'd once dreamt of, but it was real, raw, forged in the crucible of shared secrets and unspoken truths. "Eve Gwen," Louis said, his voice a low rumble that resonated deep within her. He didn't need to elaborate, she knew what he meant. The woman who had posed as her, who had attempted to steal her life, her identity, her husband. Vivian closed her eyes, the image of Eve's venomous glare flashing behind her eyelids. "She won't be a problem anymore," she murmured, her voice laced with a quiet strength. She opened her eyes and met Louis's gaze. "I'll take care of it." A flicker of approval crossed Louis's features. He knew she wouldn't hesitate. He'd seen the steel in her eyes, the fire that burned beneath her fragile exterior. He leaned in, his breath warm against her ear. "No, Vivian," he whispered, his voice a caress against her skin. "We will take care of it. Together." The words, so simple yet so profound, resonated deep within her. Together. It was a promise, a vow, a shared future. A future she wouldn't have dared to imagine just a few days ago. In the quiet of the hospital room, surrounded by the sterile scent of antiseptic and the rhythmic beeping of machines, Vivian felt a sense of peace she hadn't known she craved. The chaos of the past few days had settled, leaving behind a strange, fragile calm. She looked at Louis, truly looked at him, seeing past the mask of power and control to the man beneath. The man who had saved her, protected her, claimed her. And in that moment, she knew, with a certainty that settled deep in her bones, that she was finally home. Later, as the last rays of sunlight filtered through the hospital window, painting the room in hues of gold and rose, Louis spoke again. "Your family," he began, his voice laced with a subtle tension, "they won't trouble you again. The arrangements have been made." Vivian nodded, understanding passing between them without the need for words. She knew what he meant, the unspoken implication hanging heavy in the air. The Chase family, her family, would be dealt with. Their greed, their betrayal, would have consequences. And Louis, her enigmatic, powerful husband, would ensure that justice, in whatever form it took, would be served. She leaned against him, drawing strength from his presence, a silent acknowledgement of the darkness that swirled around them, a darkness they would navigate together. In the heart of the storm, they had found each other, two fractured souls bound by secrets and lies, yet inexplicably drawn to the fragile promise of a shared future. And in that shared future, Vivian knew, with a certainty